Hello everyone, welcome to Android Study Jam session 3. So, before we begin, I would just like to reiterate that in order to receive the certificate, you will have to complete the track 2 of Android Study Jam. It is not mandatory to complete the track 1, but it is mandatory to complete the track 2 in order to receive the certificate. So, moving on to the session, in today's session we will be completing uh, the tip calculator app from track 1 unit 2. So let's start. So we'll start by creating the layout of our app. So I'll be using the XML here to create the XML layout. So to start, first I'll just create the edit text so that the user can input the cost of the service. So I'm going to have the width the same as that of the parent. Let's say the ID is cost of service. I'll also add constraints, and I'm also going to add the constraint top. Let's say let's also add a hint as to, like, we are going to ask what the cost of the service is, and we are going to add the input type. So the input type will be number decimal, so that only numbers can be inputted. So we'll also be adding the radio group so that the user can select some tip percentage that will be added to the main cost of service, so that the whole sum can be displayed. So to do that, let's create a radio group. I'm going to give it an ID as let's say tip options, and we want the orientation to be vertical. And now let's just add constraints. So I'm going to have the start constraint as parent, and it should be to the bottom of the edit text. It should be cost of service. Yes. And now inside this radio group, we are going to add the radio buttons. I'm going to give the text as, let's say, 15%. Actually, we can give the text size also in the radio group. Okay, I have to give it here. And we'll have to create 3 such buttons. So let's create 3 such buttons. So I'll also add the ID for this. So let's say and I'll just copy paste these radio buttons. I'll just edit this to 10% and 5%. So now we have our radio group created. I think we should also add a question about this so that it's clear like what we are asking from the user. So I'll add a text view here. I can just change this to match parent. Let's say how was the let's say service quality. I'm not sure. Add text as and let's add constraints. This should be bottom and it says constraint start as parent, and let's move this radio button below the text here. Service quality. No, sorry. This should be service quality. Yeah. So now we have the radio group, the equation, and an edit text field. So what else do we need? I think we'll also need another text view to display the result and a button to calculate the tip. We can now add the button. So sorry. I'm going to give the ID as calculate and text as I'll also increase the text size to 25 sp, and now let's just add the constraints, and we'll add the top constraint. So it should be to the bottom of the radio group. So it was that options. Yeah. We can also add a default selected option in the radio group. So let's say checked is option 15, so that 15% will be checked by default. So we can also add the padding around the constraint layout so that it looks better. I'm going to say 20 dp. Okay, so we now have created the majority of our UI. We can also add a text view. So I'm going to say match parent and wrap content for height. Let's say ID as result, and let's add the constraints again. This will be below the button. Let's say text size actually. I'm going to have it 20 sp. So I think we have created the UI that we want, so that we can calculate the tip. Later we'll look at different UI elements like switch and so on. So now we'll just code some simple logic to calculate the tip. Okay, so now we will be using the view binding to get the references to our UI elements. So to do that, we'll open this project and we'll open the build.gradle file. So in the Android section, we will be adding these two lines. So build features, and we are going to say view binding equal to true. And after you have added these two lines, we have to click the sync now in the top right hand corner. So this will sync the Gradle, and we can go ahead and close this. And now we just have to edit this main Kotlin file. So now I'm going to create the variable for binding. So I'm going to use a latent keyword. So what it does is that it tells your code that you will be initializing the variable before using it in your code. So I'm going to call this variable binding. And now we just need to initialize the binding object. Okay, so now we have initialized the binding object, and now instead of passing the content view using the resource ID, we are going to pass it using the view hierarchy. So the the binding object will have a root, which is going to be the root in the hierarchy tree of the UI element. So let's say binding dot root. So what this will do is it will pass in the root view. So now we just so now we can just reference the UI elements using the binding object. So we are going to set an on-click listener for our calculate button. So the ID for it was calculate. So to do that, let's say binding dot calculate dot set on click listener, and we are just going to execute a function that we are going to define now. Let's say let's call it calculate tip. And let's define a function calculate tip, and now we just need to calculate the tip. So let's get the references for the cost of service text field. So its ID is cost of service. So I'm going to say var cost equal to binding dot cost of service. Actually the ID is in underscore. Yes, one more thing. Even though the ID is in underscores, the binding object is going to change the ID, which is actually the reference in camel cases. So only the first letter is going to be small, and the subsequent words will have the first letter capital. So this is the camel case, and now we just have to get the text of this cost of service. From text to we'll first have to convert it to a string and then to int. So So now we'll get the cost. We can also get the amount of percentage the user is willing to tip. So I'm going to create a variable tip percentage. So what we'll be doing is we'll be storing the percentage that we'll be using to calculate the amount of tip on the cost of service. So to do that, I'll be using a when statement, and we'll do binding, and the ID for our radio group was tip options. So tip options dot, and we need to get the radio button that was checked. So so now we'll just compare which check button we are going to check for. So we have three options: option 15, 10 and 5. So if it is 15, we are going to return 0.15 and just copy paste it. If it is 10, we are going to return 0.1, and if it is none of these, we are going to return 0.05. So now we have got the tip percentage, and we'll also need actually we can just now calculate the percentage of the tip. So let's say var tip result equal to cost, and we just multiply by tip percentage, and now we just need to display it in the text view, resulting text view. To do that, we'll just get the binding, and I think the resulting text view was result. So we'll just change its text, which will be tip result. So now that we have created this, we can check and run this. So let's say it's building. This was our previous app. So it'll take some time to build. Okay, so let's see, let's say my cost of service was 100 and I want to tip 10% of it. So we get the result as 10. Let's say 15, I'll get 15. Let's say 75 and 15% tip. So this is basically how we can calculate a tip. So now let's try to add another UI element for example like switch, as if we are going to round up the tip that we calculate. So we'll give that option to the user. So let's edit the XML. So to add a switch element, we'll say switch, say 0dp. What 0dp will do is that it will match constraints, and I'll add a height as wrap content. I'll also add some id as round tip, and we'll just now add the constraints. let's say start to the start of parent, and let's say bottom of or radio group. So it was step options, and we'll move the text view, the resulting text view below it. So I'll say round up. Actually, the button should also be below this. So just remove this, and we'll move the button below this. Okay, so we've added the switch, and also add some text here saying round the tip. It will ask us that are we supposed to round the tip. We can also increase the text size, let's say 25 sp. We can also add another constraint so that our switch is to the extreme right. So constraint will start. Okay, so this should be the right of parent. Actually change the width to match parent instead. Okay, let's add some margin on top and bottom. So I'm just going to add 5 dp and say 5 dp. Okay, so now that we have an ID for our switch as well, let's just get the reference for it, and if the switch is checked, we are going to round up our tip. So I'll just create a variable to see if the round up button is checked. Let's say round up. And we can just say is checked. So if round up, we are going to round our tip result. Let's actually move this below, and we can say tip result equal to, we are going to use the math.seal function, which is sealing function, and I will just pass in tip result, and there we have it. Let's rerun this. So okay, so let's say I have 100. So let's take some other number, let's say 56, and I want to tap 15%, and I want to round it up. If I don't round it up, I get 8.4. If I do round it up, I get 9. Also try with some other percentages, so let's say 76, and 5% tip on it. Switch of the round the tip switch, calculate, we get this. So this was the basic tip calculator app. So Hope you enjoyed this Android Study Jam session. And this was the third Android Study Jam session, and hope you all liked it. So stay tuned for the next sessions. We will be having some guest sessions over the period of next few weeks. So until then, have a good day and goodbye.